Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Catherine Saget. I work at the ILO. The ILO is a specialized agency of the UN which promotes internationally agreed basic labor rights. It has celebrated its centenary just last year. So in my presentation, I will talk about the labor market perspective of the transition. And I will first start with why environmental sustainability matters for the world of work, why it is important that ministries of labor, workers and employers organizations, which are the direct counterpart of the ILO, why they need to integrate environmental sustainability in their own agenda. Second, I will provide you with estimation of the employment impact of transition scenario, transition ways of achieving sustainability. And third, I would also like to give you a glimpse of the kind of labor policy that we think at the ILO are important, essential to make the transition a successful one. So let's start first with why environmental sustainability matters for the world of work. Well, many jobs are dependent on the environment. It is obvious from mining or fisheries, and if fisheries were to collapse, 80 million jobs would be lost. Many jobs also depend on ecosystem services, services that are provided by the environment for free, such as soil regeneration, water and air purification, and so on. And globally, we estimate that 1.2 billion jobs depend directly on the environment. So these 1.2 billion jobs are mostly jobs in agriculture, in forestry, and in fishery. And they represent 49% of jobs in Asia and 47% of all jobs in Africa. So many jobs depend on the quality on the environment, the level of job, but the quality of job as well. And I would like to discuss one example of this relationship, which is the difficulty to work under extreme heat. So heat stress refers to a situation where it is too hot to work or too hot to work at regular, normal intensity. At temperatures of about 24, 26 degrees, workers already start slowing down. And at 35, 36 degrees, it is estimated that the productivity of a worker with moderate work intensity is divided by 2. Heat stress is more prevalent for workers working outdoors, such as in agriculture, in construction, in refusal collection, in tourism, in sport, but it can also occur for workers in factories without air conditioning, or even for office workers. So basically, heat stress endangers the safety of work, and it reduces the productivity. So it can slow down economy. Heat stress concentrates in tropical and subtropical areas, but as we know from the experience in Europe in 2003, it can also affect regions with temperate climates. And the drought in 2003 led to an economic cost of 13 billion euros. It also led to the death of thousands of elderly people and to the death of young people, mostly young men working on construction sites. Big cities are also more likely to be affected because they experience significant higher temperature than the surrounding rural areas. The ILO has calculated the impact of heat stress under a 1.5 degree scenario for all countries, for workers in agriculture, in construction, in industry, and in services. And we found that on average, in 2030, there will be a loss in working hours of 2.2% with respect to a scenario, a business as usual scenario, a scenario without global warming. So a reduction in working hours of 2.2%. That is equivalent to 80 million full-time jobs lost due to heat stress in 2030. We also find that the distribution of heat stress is unequal, and in particular two regions, South Asia and Western Africa, are mostly affected with a loss of working hours of around 5%. We also found that some countries, so here what this reflects really is the increasing exposure to high temperature of certain regions, and also obviously the economic structure, since we assume that workers in agriculture are mostly affected. So also the reason why that we found that if you look at the distribution of working hours lost, you see that it's mostly workers in agriculture and workers in construction that see their hours of work reduce. So this shows the distribution of heat stress, or how we measure the impact of heat stress in the 10 worst affected countries. And you see here that 8 out of these 10 worst affected countries are least developed countries, mostly from Western Africa. So basically what we are showing here is that heat stress will lead to an increase in inequality between countries. In addition, it will also lead to an increase in inequality within countries. Think of street vendors, for example. We are also showing that heat stress is correlated with lack of social protection. It is correlated with informal employment. It is correlated with working poverty. So it's really affecting, bringing more constraints on social development. The ILO has also found that heat stress is one of the drivers of migration. So we're not the first organization to say that climate change can affect migration, but here we are showing really how this effect can take place through workers trying to minimize the effect of rising temperatures on their health, or to compensate for the loss of income due to the lower productivity. So this was really one example about why environmental sustainability matters for the world of work, for the level of employment, and for working conditions. Now turning to the employment impact of a sustainability scenario, and this shows the energy scenario, which assume that the targets of the Paris Agreement are met, and they are met based on a change in the energy mix towards more renewable, increasing use of electric vehicles, and also a better retrofitting on building. And through that change in policies, 24 million jobs can be created globally. There will be employment losses as well. 6 million jobs will be lost. And here, this shows the distribution by region, with most countries gaining from the transition on the employment side, but with the exception of the Middle East and to a lower level, also Africa. It is also possible to look at the distribution of employment creation and employment losses by sectors of the economy. And we have data for 163 sectors of the economy. This shows the main sectors where employment is respectively created and destroyed. We found that out of 163 sectors, only 14 will experience losses of more than 10,000 jobs. However, the job losses will be significant in some sectors, mostly the refinery and the extraction of oil and other natural resources. On the employment creation side, construction is the leading sector, and also the production and the services associated with renewable energy. So that's one scenario, one way of looking at the employment impact of a transition. We also looked at the move towards a circular economy. We've looked at sustainable agriculture, sustainable transport, sustainable fisheries, and how, through the different linkages across the economy, across countries, how different sectors and countries are affected. So what this shows really, the result of all these exercises, is that there will be employment losses in some sectors and in some countries, and hence policies must be in place to help workers to move to the growing sector, and also to support workers in the income support. Speaking of policies, just one result on skills. We are able to also associate the various level of skills by occupation that people have in different occupations, different sectors, using labor force surveys. So with that, we can also compute the level of skills. This is using ISCO 8, the level of skills that will be in demand in the new economy. And here you see that many jobs that will be created will have medium skills level. Okay. So here, turning to the policy side and the kind of policies that the ILO recommend to make sure that the transition is a fair one. I would like to, obviously, skills development is very important. Without skilled labor, there is no transition. There is no installers of solar panel, no people to undertake energy audit, and so on. Social protection also needs to adapt to the challenge of climate change. But I'll mention perhaps one instrument which you might be less familiar with, which is on the legal framework and has to do with international labor standard. International labor standard. What are they? They are international treaties that ILO member states can choose to ratify and then to implement in their own national legislation. They represent basic labor rights that are agreed upon internationally by governments and also workers and employers associations. So we did a review on how international labor standards, about 200 of them, how they can help support environmental protection, indirectly or directly. And in particular, there are two international labor standards, two conventions, which support the protection of the environment. One is the Convention on Chemicals, and the other is the Convention on Occupational Safety and Health in Agriculture. And what these two conventions provide is they provide for solution to deal with waste and pollution at the workplace where these products are used. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the Stockholm and the Minamata Convention. And this convention, these instruments, they provide solution to deal with waste and other dangerous chemical products at the place of production, not where they're used, but where they are produced. So I think this is a nice way of looking at labor laws and international labor standards in particular, and how they can complement environmental policies. There is also one instrument, which is, I think the ILO has the only international labor convention on indigenous and tribal people, and this convention provides for the obligation to undertake environmental assessment of any development program directed to this group of a population. So we'll pass on how national labor law can contribute to the transition. Social dialogue. We believe at the ILO that employers and workers' organization, just like in Switzerland, everybody is, informally consulted on any policy proposal. We think that this is really good. So in conclusion, I would like to say two things on the kind of support that the ILO provides to its member states. And the first one is on how the ILO is helping countries to adapt to the consequences of climate change and environmental degradation. And I mentioned here occupational safety and health. And obviously, the goal of having all countries have their own national policy on that is very ambitious. But there are very simple ways to help countries, just as providing better information on weather forecasts and what these weather forecasts mean for workers and households. That's something very basic, but it's not always done. It is also very important to have institutions to dialogue on how working conditions, work organization can be adapted to heat stress. For example, changing the time at which work starts on construction site. Workers also can be trained into recognizing early signs of heat stress in their colleagues. So you see here that they are very simple, not necessarily very costly measures, but also sometimes when we start speaking about reducing working time and changing work equipment, that can be really costly. Also, if we talk about safety of buildings, very, very costly. And another kind of important support that the ILO provides, which is helpful for the green transition, is to help countries to understand the consequences of their environmental engagements on the human skills development. And sometimes, very often, actually in 2/3 of cases, this is not done. Countries take adopt environmental targets without paying attention to what this implies for the kind of skilled labor. So I hope that these two examples are useful for you, and they perhaps also help you to understand how labor laws and labor institutions can also support environmental goals and not sometimes be an obstacle to it. Thank you.